From a Ryder Cup partnership falling apart in public, to a feud that turned golf into internet memes, all the way to a civil war that split the entire sport, these are the 8 most infamous rivalries in golf history. And we start with number 8. 8. Patrick Reed versus Jordan Spieth. No one thought that Patrick Reed and Jordan Spieth would ever become rivals, because they were actually the opposite of that for quite a while. For a while, they looked like one of America's best team golf pairings. At the Ryder Cup and President's Cup, they had energy, chemistry, and that perfect contrast of personalities. Together, they just worked. And that is what made the breakup so awkward. At the 2018 Ryder Cup in Paris, Reed and Spieth were not paired together. On paper, that might not sound like a huge deal. Captains split pairings all the time. But this was different, because Reed and Spieth had become a recognizable team. Fans expected them together. Then, after America lost badly, Reed made it public. He said, "The issue's obviously with Jordan not wanting to play with me." That one line changed the whole story. Suddenly, this was no longer just a captain's decision. It sounded like a teammate had been rejected. Reed also said, "For somebody as successful in the Ryder Cup as I am, I don't think it's smart to sit me twice." And whether people agreed with him or not, it revealed something bigger. Team USA did not just lose to Europe that week. It also looked like it had problems inside its own room. That is why this rivalry belongs on the list. It was not the biggest feud in golf history. It was not the ugliest. But it was a rare case where a successful partnership fell apart in front of everyone. 7. Tiger Woods versus Sergio Garcia. When Sergio Garcia first arrived, he looked like the perfect young rival for Tiger Woods. He had the talent, the flair, and the confidence, and he had that youthful swagger that made people think, maybe this is the guy who can actually push Tiger. But that is not quite how it played out. Because Tiger did not just beat players, he distanced himself from the rest of the field. And for Sergio, that shadow seemed impossible to escape. Their rivalry simmered for years, but it really turned ugly in 2013 at the Players' Championship. There was a dispute over crowd movement during a shot, with Sergio feeling Tiger had caused a distraction. Tiger denied doing anything wrong. It was the kind of golf argument that could have disappeared after a few days. But then Sergio made it worse. At a European Tour dinner, when asked if he would invite Tiger over for dinner during the US Open, Sergio said, "We will serve fried chicken." The backlash was immediate. Tiger called the comment wrong, hurtful, and clearly inappropriate. Sergio apologized, but the damage was already done. What had once looked like a competitive rivalry had crossed into something much uglier. And that is what makes Tiger versus Sergio so infamous. It was never really a balanced rivalry in terms of achievement. Tiger was Tiger. Sergio was a brilliant player, but he was not chasing the same historical mountain. The tension came from something else. It came from the feeling that Sergio was constantly battling Tiger's presence, Tiger's dominance, and maybe even the frustration of being compared to someone he could never fully catch. And from one bitter rivalry shaped by Tiger's shadow, we move to a rivalry shaped by one of the most painful Sundays Augusta has ever seen. 6. Greg Norman versus Nick Faldo. Some rivalries are built over years. This one was built in one afternoon, 1996. Masters, Greg Norman had everything in front of him. He started the final round with a 6-shot lead. He was one of the most talented players in the world, a global star, and Augusta looked ready to finally reward him. Then Nick Faldo happened. Faldo played a brilliant final round, calm, sharp, clinical. Norman went the other way. His game started leaking oil early, then completely fell apart. He shot 78, Faldo shot 67. A 6-shot Norman lead turned into a 5-shot Faldo victory. And golf never really let Norman forget it. The image everyone remembers is the hug on the 18th green, Faldo embracing Norman, almost comforting him. It was gracious, but it was also brutal, because that hug became the visual symbol of Norman's heartbreak. This was not a rivalry full of insults. That is what makes it different. Faldo and Norman were not Brooks and Bryson. They were not taking social media shots or calling each other names. But Faldo became attached to Norman's worst sporting memory forever. Every time people talk about Norman's career, 1996. Every time they talk about 1996, they talk about Faldo. That is a different kind of rivalry. It is not loud. It is haunting. And years later, it got another strange layer when Norman became the face of LIV Golf, while Faldo became one of LIV's sharpest critics. Suddenly, the old Augusta tension had a modern sequel. But before golf had Norman versus Faldo, it had the rivalry that helped turn the sport into a television spectacle. 5. Arnold Palmer versus Jack Nicklaus. Arnold Palmer and Jack Nicklaus were not enemies. That is important to say. But their rivalry was massive because it was about more than scorecards. It was about the soul of golf's audience. Palmer was the people's champion. He had charisma, emotion, and a fan base so loyal it had its own name, Arnie's Army. People did not just watch Palmer, they followed him. They believed in him. He made golf feel human, dramatic, and accessible. Then Jack Nicklaus arrived. And at first, many Palmer fans did not want him. Nicklaus was younger, bigger, stronger, and terrifyingly good. He did not have Palmer's charismatic magic, though. The rivalry truly exploded at the 1962 U.S. Open at Oakmont. Palmer was on home turf in Pennsylvania. The crowd was behind him. The setting was perfect for him. But Nicklaus beat him in an 18-hole playoff. It was Jack's first major championship, and it felt like the start of a new era. Palmer still had the love of the fans, but Nicklaus had announced himself as the man who could take the throne. That is why this rivalry is so important. It was not infamous because of hatred. It was infamous because fans were forced to choose emotionally between the beloved hero and the young destroyer. Palmer had the army, Nicklaus had the future. And over time, the rivalry became more respectful, even warm. But in the beginning, it had real tension. Nicklaus was booed. He was treated like the villain in Palmer's story. Which is funny now, because Jack Nicklaus eventually became one of the most respected figures in golf history. But in that moment, he was the threat. 4. Seve Ballesteros versus Paul Azinger. The Ryder Cup does something strange to golf. It takes a quiet individual sport and turns it into a pressure cooker. And few rivalries captured that better than Seve Ballesteros versus Paul Azinger. Seve was Europe's heartbeat. He was creative, emotional, brilliant, and absolutely fearless. He could turn a bad lie into a miracle shot and a Ryder Cup crowd into a weapon. Azinger, too, was not the kind of player to back down from that. He was intense, competitive, and perfectly willing to meet fire with fire. So, when Seve and Azinger collided, it was never going to be polite. Their tension reached another level during the 1991 Ryder Cup at Kiawah Island, known as the War by the Shore. Even the nickname tells you what kind of week it was. There were accusations of gamesmanship. There were disputes. There was a ball-switching controversy involving Azinger and Chip Beck. There were claims about coughing and distractions. And the language got personal. Seve reportedly called Azinger a liar. Azinger called Seve the king of gamesmanship. What makes this rivalry great for a list like this is that both men made sense in their own way. Seve was fighting for Europe with everything he had. Azinger was fighting for America with the same intensity. Neither side saw themselves as the villain. And that is why it became so combustible. Seve versus Azinger is an example of old-school golf hostility at its best. But the next rivalry took hostility into a completely different era. Less Ryder Cup battlefield, more social media circus. 3. Brooks Koepka versus Bryson DeChambeau. Brooks Koepka and Bryson DeChambeau were almost too perfect as rivals. They felt like two completely different types of golfers. Brooks was blunt, cool, and almost allergic to overthinking. He showed up at majors like he had been built for them, but somehow still acted like he did not care that much. Bryson was the opposite. He was numbers, science, speed training, protein shakes, single-length irons, and endless experimentation. He wanted to solve golf like an equation. So naturally, they annoyed each other. The tension started with little things. Slow play comment from Brooks, social media digs. Brooks making it clear he was not exactly a fan of Bryson's style. Bryson firing back in his own way. For a while, it was simmering. Then came the video. At the 2021 PGA Championship, Brooks was doing a Golf Channel interview when Bryson walked behind him. Brooks rolled his eyes, visibly irritated, and lost his train of thought. Once that clip leaked, the feud became bigger than golf. Fans started chanting Brooks's name at Bryson. Social media turned it into endless meme content. Suddenly, casual viewers who barely followed golf knew one thing: Brooks and Bryson did not like each other. And honestly, that was the appeal. This rivalry did not have the history of Palmer versus Nicklaus. It did not have the emotional depth of Tiger versus Phil. But it had something modern golf rarely gets: mainstream drama. Later, after both became connected through LIV, Koepka said they had squashed it, and that almost made the whole thing funnier. The rivalry that once felt so intense eventually became two guys on the same side of golf's bigger war. But before Brooks and Bryson turned golf into meme culture, another rivalry defined an entire generation. 2. Tiger Woods versus Phil Mickelson. Tiger was the machine. Phil was the magician. Tiger made winning look ruthless. Phil made golf look imaginative, dangerous, and occasionally reckless. Tiger felt like control. Phil felt like possibility. And for years, that contrast carried the sport. The truth is, Phil was not Tiger's equal historically. Nobody in that era really was. Tiger's peak was too dominant, too overwhelming. But Phil was the one star big enough to stand across from him and make the comparison interesting. And fans loved the contrast. Tiger was intimidating and very private. Phil smiled, gambled, hit ridiculous recovery shots, and somehow made it all look charming. If Tiger was the player everyone feared, Phil was the player everyone felt they could root for. Their relationship was not always warm. One of the most famous examples came at the 2004 Ryder Cup, when they were paired together, and the result was a disaster. On paper, pairing the two biggest American stars made sense. In reality, it looked uncomfortable and ineffective. For years, the rivalry had that chill around it. Not outright hatred, but distance, competition, ego. Two superstars orbiting the same sport without ever really feeling like close allies. But over time, something changed. Phil later admitted Tiger pushed him to reach a higher level. Tiger also praised Phil's competitiveness and determination. Then came their made-for-TV match, where the rivalry was no longer hidden under awkward smiles. It was packaged, sold, and enjoyed. That is what makes Tiger versus Phil so powerful. And now, number 1, something that split the entire sport in two. 1. PGA Tour versus LIV Golf. The biggest rivalry in golf history was not between two players. When LIV Golf arrived, it did not just add another tour to the calendar. It challenged the entire power structure of professional golf. The PGA Tour had long been the center of the men's professional game. Then, LIV showed up with Saudi backing, huge contracts, and a very clear message. Players had another option now. And suddenly, golf was divided. Some players took the money and left. Others stayed loyal to the PGA Tour. Fans picked sides. Media picked sides. Ryder Cup debates got messy. Major championship conversations got complicated. Friendships became awkward. Press conferences turned tense. And at the center of it all was the question golf could not avoid. What matters more, legacy or money? Phil Mickelson became one of the defining figures of the split. His comments about the PGA Tour's obnoxious greed and his shocking remarks about the Saudi backers lit the fuse. Rory McIlroy became one of the most visible defenders of the PGA Tour. Greg Norman became the face of LIV. Tiger Woods stayed firmly with the PGA Tour. This was no longer just a disagreement. It was a civil war. The rivalry had lawsuits, suspensions, public statements, private meetings, angry fans, and uncomfortable locker rooms. Players who had spent years competing beside each other were suddenly framed as loyalists or defectors. Then came the twist. In 2023, the PGA Tour, DP World Tour, and Saudi Public Investment Fund announced a framework agreement. After all the fighting, the sides were suddenly trying to make peace. But professional golf still did not have a clean, simple future. Even years later, the split still has not been neatly solved. LIV is still operating separately. PGA Tour players and LIV players are still not competing together every week. And the question of what men's professional golf should look like remains unsettled. That is why PGA Tour versus LIV is number one.